This is the reading of page 260 to 265 in the Human Odyssey. The Greek citizen states. Herodotus and Thucydides were interested in stories of past times, partly because they were very attached to the city-states in which they lived. Sometimes those communities made war on each other. We've learned that the ancient Greeks didn't unite under one king ruling the entire mainland and islands. Instead, they lived in small city-states such as Athens, Sparta, Corinth, or Thebes. Geography helped determine this political landscape. The mountains and sea divided the land, forming natural barriers between city-states. But another reason the Greeks lived in city-states was that they preferred it that way. They believed the individual state, the polis as they called it, gave them a better way of life. They believed it gave them a better way to exercise the freedom that, as the myth told it, had been so hard won for them by Prometheus. The Greek word polis is often translated as city-state, but it wasn't just a city and its surroundings. The better translation for polis is citizen state. Each polis was a small state run not by a mighty monarch or unlimited powers, but by citizens who often wrote constitutions and used some forms of elected government. The Greeks knew all about great empires like Egypt and Persia. In an empire, one powerful ruler governed all the people. He was often considered a god king. His word was law and nobody challenged it. People who lived hundreds of miles away from him had to obey. The Greeks, and then here's a picture here, much like the Greek cities of old, a modern day hilltop village perches between mountain and sea. So this is current, but it might be what it looked like long ago. So the Greeks, however, did not believe any mortal ruler could be a god or should act as a god. They thought living under such a king or emperor would be no better than slavery. The Greeks both admired human potential and doubted the wisdom of kingly rule. They asked themselves, how could a king living in one city know what the people in another city need? Why should so many people obey just one man? How could they be sure that they would be a good ruler? Aren't free and learned people capable of making their own laws? The Greeks believed that because each city-state knew its own needs, each should make its own rules, have its own form of government, and keep its own army. Each city-state should even be free to decide what gods it would worship. Citizens could share in making their city greater or better. They could help to make laws. They could share in governing. They could feel proud and free. The polis is school. For citizens of ancient Greece, the city-state or polis represented everything good about Greek life. It was not just a kind of government, but a sort of school. A citizen from ancient Greece might have put it this way. We serve on juries for the polis. This teaches us to be just. We fight to defend the polis. This teaches us to be brave. We make laws to protect the polis. This teaches us to be unselfish. Our statesmen set examples from which we can learn. Our laws teach us to behave properly. Our temples teach us to honor the gods. Our polis shows us how to lead a good life. To the ancient Greek, the polis wasn't just a place, it was the people as well. Gradually, the Greeks developed the idea that the polis should serve the will of all of its citizens. The citizens, in turn, should be devoted to the polis and be directly involved in its government. In the city-state of Athens, men becoming citizens took an oath that shows the affection and sense of responsibility the Greeks held for the polis. The young men were 17 to 19 years of age, about the same as an American college freshman today. Here follows a modern version of the oath, which has been widely adapted by schools and institutions around the world. The Athenian Oath. We will never bring disgrace on this our city by an act of dishonesty or cowardice. We will fight for the ideals and sacred things of the city, both alone and with many. We will revere and obey the city's laws, and will do our best to incite a like reverence and respect in those above us who are prone to annul them or set them at naught. We will strive increasingly to quicken the public sense of civic duty. Thus, in all these ways, we will transmit this city not less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. The citizens of Athens were proud to pledge this oath. But who's a citizen? Citizens of a polis had the honor and duty of sharing in governance. But not all the people in a city-state were citizens. In fact, the vast majority were not. Women, for example, were not citizens. They did not participate in politics or attend schools. In some city-states, women were very important at the numerous religious events, but in others, they rarely appeared at public events. In all city-states, women had great responsibility for managing the household and raising children, and keeping the accounts of the home's goods and expenses. In some city-states, they could own property. Foreigners generally were not given citizenship. Sometimes even the sons and grandsons of foreigners could not be citizens. There were often many free working men living in a polis, merchants, craftsmen, doctors, teachers, who came from other places. Their skills were respected, and they could even earn riches in their trades, but because they were not born in the polis, they were not considered citizens. At the bottom of the ladder in the life of the polis were slaves. Many of these slaves were people who had been captured in wars or pirate raids. Most were non-Greeks. They did everything from laboring in fields and mines to working in shops to teaching children. Slaves did much of the heavy work and often helped to keep trade and manufacturing going. While the ancient Greeks prized freedom, their liberty often came at the expense of others. Does this mean the Greeks were hypocrites? They said they valued human ability and loved freedom, but most people were not citizens and thus did not get the chance to exercise that freedom fully. To understand this contradiction, we need to think about the Greeks in the context of their time. And just real quick, let's take a look at this. Female dancers and musicians celebrate the god Dionysus. Though not citizens, women often performed important ritual functions as shown on this dish. They also managed households, sometimes owned property, and figured prominently in Greek drama. Okay, so down here, let's come back here. Greek civilization emerged in a world of kings and empires. It emerged at a time when many people elsewhere in the world were ruled by tyrannical kings who claimed to be gods. The Greeks said this was wrong. They would not tolerate being ruled by a so-called god king. In Greek assemblies, courts, schools, and juries, more people were taking part in civic life as free citizens than ever before in history. The Greeks even called this system democracy, which means rule of the people. In fact, as we've seen, not all the people ruled. Nevertheless, the Greek citizens' rule of the polis was, in these ancient times, an important new way of thinking about how people should be governed. The Greeks were trailblazers. In time, as their ideas spread, the course that started as a narrow, rocky path would become a wide avenue of freedom. celebrating human possibilities. The Greeks weren't the only early people to ask what good government is. Confucius, for example, thought that virtuous rulers created good governments. They could inspire their citizens to be virtuous. The Hebrews thought that good governments were those that obeyed God's laws and inspired their people to do the same. But the Greeks set themselves apart by trying to understand government in a more scientific way. Greek thinkers didn't believe a single person could rule wisely over large numbers of men. Sooner or later, they said, one all-powerful ruler would end up interfering with men's freedom. They didn't agree with the Hebrews about government, partly because they had such different ideas about God or the gods. Most Greeks were polytheists. They didn't look to their gods to show them right laws or ways of acting. They felt that man would be able to figure out these things for himself. Man, they said, should use his mind and past experience to choose the kind of government that would work best. The importance of human beings was foremost in the Greek mind. As the symbolic meaning of the myth of Prometheus suggests, from the moment Prometheus stole fire for the frightened creatures in caves, human beings had proven they could think for themselves. They had been given the gift of reason, and combined that with the will to strive toward excellence. Admiration for human ability and potential revealed itself in Greek literature and athletics, in their art and histories. It showed itself in their citizen states, which prized freedom. As well as we'll see, Greek faith in the power to think and reason could help steer the course of the human odyssey for centuries to come. And that's where the reading for page 260 to 265 ends.